Sorry, Tara.
I feel like I'm at the circus.
Good morning, everybody. Oh yeah, happy birthday, Mel Milloway, from all of TLDC.
Happy birthday.
Welcome. Thank you all for joining us on our back and forth morning. I woke up, we had some wires crossed, so I woke up with more notifications than I normally wake up to and thought something's happening. And I checked and thought, oh no, Jack thinks we're doing this Wednesday. The world thinks we're doing this Monday. So we'll just go with what the world thinks. So thank you all very much for joining. This is our first Monday of the month case study. So we always like to start first Monday of the month talking about a practical project, really digging into the weeds of things and talking about lessons learned. And then that's something to take away and hopefully apply in some cases like yours, Jack, very, very soon. But we'll get to. So my guest today is Jack Hutchinson, who I've had the pleasure of meeting at TLDcast. We shared a house, and I'm very, very excited to have her on. So we were talking in the green room. We know everyone in the chat, but for posterity's sake and for the podcast sake, do you want to talk a little bit about who you are, what you do?
Sure. You can hear me okay, right? Still?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. So I'm Jack Hutchinson, short for Jacqueline, not Jackie. Just need to make that very clear. I am the owner of eLearning Pros Instructional Design, Inc., which is a Caledon, Ontario-based eLearning instructional design and development company, focusing really on corporate eLearning. ILT is not really something I love, so I try to stay away from that myself. And I've been involved in training and development for a long time, so like more than 25 years. 60 sound old, so
yes.
Yeah, so that's me.
Great. And you have a background not just in e-learning but LMS development with the City of Toronto.
Yeah, I was the learning management system lead on the program implementing the City of Toronto's first corporate-wide learning management system. I was an IT role in the HR group, Corporate Learning and Leadership Development, which has since changed its name to something else. I don't know because I'm not there. So I love the LMS side, but I love the e-learning more. So,
and it's good to love both. I think that's an important. The e-learning people who never want to touch an LMS, I think, have a few more struggles than those of us who are willing to get in there. So if you want to learn a lot more about Jack's background and also really interesting look at her transition into owning her own company, the Instructional Redesign podcast that Kara and Joe Suarez do, if you can put a link in there, Kara, it's wonderful to listen to.
Oh, thank you.
I think especially
Kara and Joe are like the best hosts.
Yes. And that's really a perfect one for a lot of TLDC because a lot of people in this group, I think, are always weighing that transition, always thinking in the back of their head, if they're not already on their own, what would it take? What should I do? So I really, really liked that episode.
Yeah, it was good. Sadly, as probably today will happen as well, I could probably talk about it for hours and hours and hours without being bored, but everybody else might be bored. Kara, that's not true. You were on it when I was talking. You're just not recorded, so don't fib. There was a little technical glitch. So Kara and I were conversing and having a chat, but Kara's audio didn't record. So,
and they really dealt with it very well.
They did.
It's at the very beginning when they kind of made that announcement, I thought, oh God. And then it worked really well. I've completely forgot about that part of the podcast. I just remembered all of the insights. And they didn't have to edit out all of Kara's laughs, which I'm sure made everyone's life easier.
It's me who laughs.
Oh yeah.
And for those of you who don't know, I also have a podcast. It's not as good as Kara and Joe's instructional design. It's called the Lounge Podcast, and it's thanks. And really, it's more a scope of looking at all of L&D and the training and development functions within corporations, larger organizations. Although because I love the e-learning part, I do talk about e-learning, but we've had academics on, my former professor was on, we've had Kara on. I've got 6 episodes getting ready to be released in my next cycle. So I've had a little bit of a break because of the project we're going to talk about actually today.
Yeah.
So there are some episodes coming out. Hope to have the first one out tomorrow. So we'll see how well it goes.
Awesome. Well, so you mentioned your kind of first love is e-learning.
Mm-hmm.
And so the last big project you worked on was moving ILT to e-learning.
Yeah.
So how, what was I always like to start with, what was the performance goal? What was your end goal?
The end goal was to convert 48 instructor-led webinars or in-class sessions to e-learning for a special audience in the UAE. It's American content for the non-American healthcare group.
Oh, okay. So a little bit of cultural translation in there as well.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
we had some challenges, but it was a fun project.
Yeah. So 48, about how many hours?
6 months. I didn't count the hours. I just counted the months. Mm-hmm.
How you started with 48 classes. Did you end with 48 classes?
No, I actually started with 33 classes and ended with 48.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and that actually, I ended up, one of the other things that happened is they realized they left off a course. So I just finished up another course for them for that same program. Mm-hmm. But because of my work on that, they had myself and our buddy Josh, who's in the chat there. Josh got to do some voiceover for them, and he did a fabulous job. So if you need a voiceover, Josh, I know John Kissinger is in the field in the chats sometimes too. So those two, awesome voices. Yeah.
And when you
I couldn't have got through that last one without Josh.
So when you listen to Jack's podcast after this, you'll hear Josh's voice, right? He does the intro.
He does the intro and the outro. And we had him on an episode. I think it was episode 4.
Okay. So you started with 33. The goal was to give the UAE-based workers the same mm-hmm. or a comparable training experience, get them up to speed in all the same competencies. So it sounds like what you did was audio. So was it kind of translating the classroom?
It was, so what I was given, so let me back up, I'll give some background. I will not be naming any names, mainly because I didn't ask them if I could talk about this. So hopefully they're not listening. They'll know who they are. I work with, on occasion, a hospital out of the States. And so their program was purchased by this hospital in the UAE. And they wanted all of the learning for 3 groups of individuals in a rehabilitation setting. So physical therapists, speech language pathologists, and nurses, to have the same kind of understanding of American procedures as what they have to apply to their hospital, because it works. So why break something when it's not broken, right? Just reapply and do what's needed. Oh, Kristen, do you want to tell Kara who that is? Oh, I can't hear you. You're muted. There you are.
This is Wilbur Wright. I'd like to say that this is, I have a framed picture of Wilbur Wright, but it's not. I'm at the office, and we're in the Wilbur Wright conference room.
Well, hey, why not, right? So
I figured you didn't want the Wi-Fi password.
Probably not.
Yeah.
So it was a really great project. I really loved it, and I had a really good time working with them. They're a great organization. Highly recommend them. And you know, if I was ever injured, I would want to be cared for in their setting. And I think that is a really important thing, that as learning professionals, we don't, I mean, we see the product that comes out of an organization, right? Like we see what they're doing, we see what they're putting together for learning and development, but we don't always make that connection on that level of, do we want to do business with this company? Or especially if you're someone like me who has different clients all the time, not just one client. But for me, you know what, if I had the money and if I needed them, that is where I would go, because I know the level of care that they're giving to their patients is phenomenal, based on the training and based on the people that I got to work with. So let me tell you a little bit about that. There were 33 to begin with, ILT PowerPoint sessions that were put together either from a webinar or designed for webinar delivery that they wanted converted into e-learning, not a video of the webinar. They wanted it e-learning, and that's because they want these people whose English is not their first language, so English as a second language, to be able to go through at their own pace. We needed to ensure that images were appropriate for the audience, so really had to be very careful with what we did choose and what we did select. I got to work with an animator on their team who designed custom medical animations for them. For some of the lessons that we did, and that was really cool to see him, you know, build blood flow and veins and things. It was really cool. But one of the things is that there was not one SME for all of the lessons. So I was working with a project coordinator and the project owner, who were the two major stakeholders that I got to deal with on a regular basis. But then if I was lucky, one subject matter expert might have done 2 or 3 of the lessons. So very often I was working with different people all the time. And so that is a bit of a challenge, because when you're looking for feedback or you're looking for someone to give you additional information because they didn't include speaking notes in their PowerPoint, you know, you want to be able to carry that relationship that you're building and kind of the lessons that you're teaching them on how you work best and how to give you what you need through the project. But that was hard because it was almost like every week I was training a new subject matter expert on how to give me what I needed. So very, very challenging.
That's really interesting. So we do a lot of agile work at my company. And one of the big things that we struggle with because of how we're set up and all that is that you really need a consistent team to learn how to work with each other. And you have to, you know, have some conflict and then solve that conflict. And then you can move forward with that. But you also need experts to help you with that specific thing that you're doing. So what were some challenges you faced with that, and how did you overcome it?
Well, there were many challenges because it's a hospital. The biggest challenge was shift work. So these folks were working shift work, many of them, vacations, you know, it's the typical project team kind of challenges, availability. But I wasn't given a schedule up front because the stakeholders didn't think I needed it. It wasn't something they thought of. They had the list, but then when I'm working on these modules, they didn't necessarily share everything with me. Another challenge I had is that there were just so many modules that they needed that were not clearly identified in the contract. Mm-hmm. So I ended up having to do a little more work than what the contract stated. 2 things came out of that. One, I built up a really good relationship with some freelancers out there. Leslie's one of them, so she's in the chat today. Our friend Simon had to help me out with a couple of lessons, and a couple of other folks that chipped in and did what they could to help me manage not just this project, but because of this project, other work that I had with ongoing clients was also suffering. And that's actually where Leslie came in, and she really helped me with one of my ongoing clients, one of the projects that they had that had some deadlines at the same time as this big project. So those were a couple of things, but building out that team and having people I could rely on to help me to really get through this. And because it ended up being a lot more lessons than what they had anticipated, the timing was a challenge. And I know, Kara, you've put a question in the question box.
Yes. So Kara wanted to know, what are some of your tips to handle customers that say they may want one thing, but you know that that's not what they need?
Oh, can I come back to that one?
Yes.
Okay.
Because what I want to know first is what your process was. So we have an idea of what the end result was, but you just started out with recordings of classroom training and webinars, and then PowerPoints with maybe notes.
Yeah. Here's the other thing. I didn't actually start on this project. Someone else started on the project, got a permanent job, and left in the middle of the project. So I was working under somebody else's contract and doing the work. And so that was, part of the contract challenge. Okay, so the process was that they would provide me with the PowerPoints. I would review the PowerPoints, make my notes. I was given a subject matter expert, and actually we didn't even get that until maybe my second or third week, where I'm like, okay, well, who's the subject matter expert on this? Who's the subject matter? Finally, they started to just put the subject matter expert's name on the PowerPoints when they were giving them to me, and their contact information so that I could reach out to them. Because they were traveling back and forth from the US to the UAE, schedules were challenging. Shift work was challenging. When I'm working during the day, they have another job to do. Somebody else mentioned that already. Subject matter experts are allowed a specific amount of time for the project. And most of these subject matter experts were also being paid extra to be the subject matter expert by this project. So like they worked for another area, but they didn't work for the project. So the project was like, oh, I'd get emails like, okay, so invoice me for the time, and not for me, but for the subject matter expert. So one of the things I really tried to do was streamline how I used the subject matter expert so that I'm costing my client less money while still getting the same result or better, same or better result. Because I don't want them to spend 4 hours with me when they really didn't need to, and then cost the project a lot of extra money. So I would review the PowerPoints. I would make notes, kind of like a storyboard, take their PowerPoint storyboard and convert it into my own storyboard. Make notes on what I was looking for interactions. We already had a template that was built by the previous team that they used. So that was good. I didn't have to think about that. But, interactions, they really wanted a lot of interactions and click and reveal or mouse over or things like that, and narration. So I had to kind of plan out everything and make sure that it was meeting the goals for each of the lessons. Now, they had already identified, they'd already done all the instructional design piece, so I didn't really have to do a lot of design. It was mostly development.
And to Kara's question, they had already done the instructional design piece. Were you, without naming names, happy with it? Did you make any changes to it, or were you pretty okay?
No, I actually made a significant amount of change. And it's because when they give you a PowerPoint and they give you the content, they have sort of designed the instruction. So they're like, yep, we put it together, and this is what we have designed the instruction for instructor-led. This is how you will present it in instructor-led. But they haven't actually done that for e-learning. So it was, you know, I might have received a 120-page PowerPoint, but in the end, that 120-page PowerPoint ended up to be maybe 25 e-learning pages with layers and state changes on text and things like that. So because they may have gone in and out, I also needed to create knowledge check questions, and in some cases, not a scenario the way we like to think about a scenario in e-learning, but a case study. So here's patient A, and here is how patient A is presenting, and then how would you, as the caregiver in your role, how would you care for this person, this patient? Yeah, so that all had to be designed and brought together. So I did do a lot of changes, and by the end of the project, though, I was just getting so burnt out and tired that I was like, just do what you can. To the folks that were helping me, just do what you can. And when I got it back, then I made whatever changes I knew that my client would want based on all the feedback that I'd received from the other lessons.
Yeah, that's always, I like being that point of, I know I'm speaking for the client now because I've been spoken to enough. So when you, when the people would take the instructor-led training, generally is one person going through all of these courses, or are they part of different learning paths?
They were part of different learning paths.
Okay.
Some of them were nurses, and so they would go through their nursing path. And the nurses had to have courses that were done by doctors. So the doctors were the subject matter experts, and doctors can be challenging. Doctors can be very challenging. They are so smart, but they can be very challenging when you're trying to, you know, it's like pulling teeth, right? To get, okay, they're not doctors. You're not talking to another doctor. You're talking to a nurse. What would you tell a nurse? What would you tell a nurse's aide? What would you tell somebody who's not a nurse? Like, so yeah, that was fun.
Yes, and that was actually kind of the selfish question, because a lot of this is reflecting the project I'm working on right now. So, and that I told you beforehand that I wanted you on very soon because I knew I was going to get personally a lot out of it.
Well, I hope you do. I hope that, you know, I hope you do. Everybody's experience is different. Every project is different. But, you know, there are some similar challenges that happen along the way. You know, we talked about schedules and scheduling and the availability of subject matter experts doing the work on the side of their desk. They got a full-time job. They got to go and look after patients. They're not available at my beck and call. So if I'm waiting for something, it doesn't mean I have to sit and wait and do nothing. I'm going to start the next project. And so I had, at times, 10 different courses in various degrees of completion while I was waiting for subject matter experts, waiting for approval of images, waiting for illustration. For probably about 90% of those lessons, I had to do the narration. I don't know if you can tell, I'm Canadian and I have a little bit of an accent, and I say project, not project. So I had to do a lot of re-recording of some of the things that I did because I was reading it like a Canadian. I was reading it like I would read that, not realizing that, you know, project was a big deal. Clearly Canadian. Yes, I am.
That's funny. I think I remember you talking about that a little bit too. It was a touchy time for me to mention your Canadian accent in January when we met. Because I think you were in the throes of all of that.
I was. We were. I took a little bit of time away from that project, and it was really all I could do to be away that long in January when I went down to Phoenix to be at TLDC. Yes, crazy.
So as you're going through this, the end users, are they able to dedicate time to training because they're also nurses? So is this before they start, like onboarding?
Yeah, this is before they started. All of the courses, part of my role was to not only create the course, but to get it up on their learning management system. So I got to put it up on their learning management system and test it out, make sure everything functioned properly. And then they were released to the audiences so that, they could get started on the training while I was finishing up other courses.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Okay. And were they kind of just going through it all at once or spacing it out?
I want to say that they were given time because it wasn't just e-learning. There were other paths that they needed to take along with the e-learning. I think the e-learning was foundational for them. So I think for many areas, they had to do the e-learning first, and then there was a webinar, and then there was in-class work that they were doing with the therapists and the nurses that were going over from the US. So there was a lot of training that was happening to ensure that they were following the guidelines that the US hospital followed.
And so they had already worked at a hospital. They weren't like new hires coming into this. They were transitioning a position from how they previously done something? Okay.
I really don't. I expect that many of them were new to the role of speech language pathology or physical therapist. I don't believe that they were existing professionals at the time. I think they were new or going from one role into another role so that it would match the hospital in the US.
Okay. Those were also selfish questions. So let me, I wanted to talk more about the kind of cultural translation you did. So besides tamping down your accent, which I also do in recordings.
It's hard to do. It really is hard to do.
Yeah, I say,
you joke, Josh, about me saying A, but I do say A all the time. So it's hard.
Yes. So, and you mentioned the images had to be pretty carefully curated just to avoid. So were there lessons learned in that, or did you just know from the jump what to look for or what to avoid?
No, they actually gave me a pretty comprehensive list of what to avoid. And so I liked that. And if you're ever getting into a situation like I was in, having the what to avoid is way better than having what to include. Because if they tell you you can't have skin on a woman unless it is a picture of a person who's getting stitched up, then okay, can't include that picture of a woman in shorts. So
yeah, okay. And then with language, did you make any, not concessions, but accommodations for non-English speaking learners?
It's really technical and medical terminology. So in some cases, I just tried to make it easier for them to listen to. One of the things that I did as I was getting near the end, and they just called me out on it actually last week. One of the things I did as I was getting near the end, I was getting tired and I just wanted to get it done because this 3-month project had turned into 6 months. And I was narrating very quickly. But it wasn't something that I did on purpose. It was just, okay, I just got to get this done. Okay, I'm going to go through it. And then when I listened to it, they sent me an email. It's like, do you think you could maybe re-record this? It sounds like maybe you sped this up at 1.5 times. And it was just my narration. But I did have to re-record a couple of pages because I did rush through it, just trying to get it done. So,
yeah. When you build, so actually, which authoring tool did you use?
Storyline.
Okay. So when you're building your layers and putting everything together, do you do anything specifically to make it easier to replace that audio timing wise? Because I know I have my own kind of tricks and techniques, but I think that's always fun to share.
No, I mean, in this case, it was just, I knew that I needed to go in and re-listen to make sure that everything was lined up. I just select the multiple objects, move them over, create a cue head spot where the narration should go, and drag over the items to the cue. But other than that, nothing, because it really wasn't a lot of change. It was was the same narration. It was just taking a little bit longer.
It's just longer on the timeline.
A little bit like 30 seconds longer. And,
Yeah.
and Joe asks a good question in the chat. Joe says, how did you handle narrating medical terminology you weren't familiar with? So there were 3 things that I did. I listened to existing, so I would search on YouTube to find existing US doctors pronouncing the terminology. And then I would just practice. The second thing I did is reach out and ask for phonetic pronunciation of the term. So if there was a term that I wasn't familiar with, or I didn't really know how, because even when you listen, you go to dictionary.com and you listen to the terms, UK, US English pronunciations are different. Canadian English is different. So it's like, oh, I don't really know, where does the emphasis on this word go? So, and then Josh has a resource that he's put in there too, forvo.com. So, and then if I was really having trouble, I had to have them record how to say it so that I could listen to them saying it and I could say it.
Okay. That's a good idea.
They didn't have a problem with that. Most of the time they would go into their PowerPoint. So after they'd been working with me for a bit, they started going into the PowerPoint, into the speaking notes and putting a bracket with the phonetic pronunciation.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Did they, could you ever get them to record directly into PowerPoint?
No, however, they did record 3 lessons.
Ooh.
And I want to re-record them. One of them is a doctor, really, really smart man, but you don't want to hear him talking. You don't want to listen to him narrating the course. And he didn't stay on script. So even though he was given the script and it was his script, he didn't stay on script. So after he recorded it, it was a little bit of little hell going back in and, well, did he actually say what the script says? And if not, I got to update that. So
yes. Yeah, I just worked on a project where I had SMEs on video calls. I just asked them to talk about what they wanted to talk about. And then my job was heavily editing and sitting on the call and directing and saying, oh, that was a good point. Could you say just that little part, not all of the other stuff?
The other thing I had too is I had twice weekly calls with my subject matter expert project lead and my stakeholder lead. So we were going through the projects and talking about where I'm stuck or what I'm still waiting for so that they could keep a handle on the project management on their end as well. So, we were, if there were things, even on the call, we did a Zoom. Sometimes we do WebEx, and so that was helpful.
That's good. Yeah, I like that. And did you keep those meetings standing? So even if you, sounds like you didn't have any weeks where you didn't have anything to talk about, but just keep it on the books.
I could have talked to them every day, but between email and the meetings, it was good.
Okay. Yeah, and I was actually going to ask how you dealt with content, especially creating knowledge checks and interactions for knowledge that you don't necessarily have. I'm not a medical
professional at all.
Right.
To me, it was, if I really struggled, I would create the question, send it to them and have them approve it. Most of the time though, it was just pulling out information from what they talked about and creating, unfortunately, multiple choice questions or true false questions, just so that they would get in the habit of answering a question and thinking about the content. So it wasn't really about they have to pass this. There's no final exam. There's nothing like that. It was more about getting them to think critically about the content that we're giving them. So. And
setting up that rhythm of you're going to be asked about this, so you might as well pay attention now. So then that'll go faster.
Yeah.
Okay. When you had some knowledge checks or multiple choice question, actually, I guess what I'm asking is, what's your favorite thing you designed? Like, what's your favorite element of the courses when you look back at it?
When I look back at it, some of the interactions that, not just me, but a couple of the freelancers that worked with me on, we did some really good interactions, and, dealing with a spinal cord injury, and dealing with, one of my favorites was aspiration. So being able to create these really engaging but educational interactions that people wanted to take, and they wanted to work on, and they wanted to redo it and try again. So that was good.
Okay.
Probably not Jane, because I haven't got approval to talk about this. I'd have to go in and basically take out all of their branding and recreate it very generic. But we'll see. It will take a long time because the courses are huge.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, how many? I know you said you didn't look at the hours, but how long do you think the average course would take for someone to get through?
For them to get through, start to finish? Well, Articulate says, based on the narration and the animations that are on the pages, Articulate said anywhere between 10 and 25 minutes. I think the longest course was 25 or 30 minutes.
Okay.
But probably longer, because there were a lot of pages that had animation and interaction that weren't accounted for in Articulate's timing. So, they had to go in and they had to read the information.
Right.
Not just here, take a moment to review the information on this page before you continue,
Right.
So then they'd have to go in and read that, or click and see the different things, different scenarios. There were a lot of sliders, especially when we were looking at the ages of this is another one I really liked. It was growth and development of children. So that was cool, using the sliders to make them grow.
Oh, neat. So you would change the picture as the slider went up, and then the information on the side. That's very cool.
Yeah. It was just fun.
Yeah. I do like the use of sliders to change the image, not just kind of make it bigger and smaller, and to trigger things like that.
Yeah. To answer Kim's question, interactions, I would say, were like drag and drop and the sliders, but animations were actually animated images and text that had to have timing set for them. So a lot of animated things that happened on the screen. And then, in conjunction with interactions. So I hope that answered your question, Kim.
And you had mentioned that you got to work with their animator.
Yeah.
Did you have any, I guess, starting out issues getting their work to be compatible with storyline and vice versa? You knew exactly what you needed and they could get it.
I told him I needed an MP4 and he made me an MP4. I told him I wanted it to be 15 seconds. It was 15 seconds.
Nice.
Yeah, he was very good, very talented.
Very good. Have you worked before with kind of internal company graphics departments to have them give you stuff?
Yeah.
And do you like working that way?
I prefer it because they already know what they need in their lessons. So for me, it's very time consuming to go and try and find a bunch of images, create a light box and say, hey, can you guys approve these images? When they could just give me the images.
Right.
Or design whatever I need if they're designing something.
Right. Or maybe
I'm not a graphic designer, so I don't want to spend my time doing that.
Yeah.
Nobody wants that. Let's be honest.
I can spend a long time doing something that's not as good as that guy will give you. So, yeah. And then did you include, I guess this goes back to the accommodations for non-native English speakers, but did you do closed captions? Did you do open captions? Did you make sure you had timer?
They only had the script. So they had the narration for the script. There was no closed captions because everything played in kind of with whatever was on the side for their script. I just made sure that everything that was on the page was covered off in the script.
Okay. And then that was in a sidebar that they can look at.
They didn't ask for any, which I thought was odd, but they did not ask for any accessibility.
Really?
In fact, it was me that said, are we going to put in a script?
Right.
Because if they're not English as a first language, do you think they might want to read it?
Did you have to watch out for things like idioms or?
Yeah, there were a few of them, and some of them I didn't even catch because that's us. It's rule of thumb.
Mm-hmm.
That's like every course had as a rule of thumb. No, as a generally accepted rule.
Yeah.
We will. So.
Yeah, and yeah, Michael, you are absolutely right. There was actually a couple of weeks ago, Guild Chat did a really good chat about that.
With Bianca and Brian and.
Yeah, that was great. If you go back to she always storifies everything.
Yeah.
That's really worth reading. And then I think Alan Natitude added some things in after the fact because I was missing him the whole time we were in that chat.
Yeah.
So I want to go through the lessons learned, but if anyone has a question that we haven't gotten to.
Well, we haven't answered Kara's question yet. I said I would come back to it.
Okay.
So
we did a little bit, but let's
we did a little bit. So when the clients say that they want one thing, but you know that it's not what they need, this audience was really good, Kara. I was so lucky because they were not argumentative at all. I would make a suggestion and I would say, I really believe that we should do, so maybe instead of wanting that animation or that illustrator to draw up their own custom animation for something, maybe they just wanted hey, can you make this a slider? And I didn't think that was the best way to talk about blood flow and how your skin heals. So I would say, hey, I really think this is a great place for your animator dude to create a visual story of what the narration and what you're trying to demonstrate. And here's what it could look like. And so I did a little bit of research when I was trying to sell them on a new technique or a new treatment. I would go and say, this is what it would look like. This is how we could do this. And here's a sample on YouTube of somebody doing something similar. Put your content in where they're talking. Just look at it as a way of trying to visualize your content. Don't get hung up on what they're saying. So they were really open and really wanted to give their new people going through this the best experience. And so, yeah, I didn't really have a problem convincing them to do things. Sometimes they had to convince me to do something that I didn't want. Like the one was actually a slider. Well, we want this to be a slider. And I'm like, nah. But I did it and they were happy with it because I did it I gave them both pages. Said, here's your slider. Here's what I would actually do. Here's what I suggest. And they chose the slider because that was what they wanted. So I gave them the choice.
That's good. That's a good
Neither
way to
was
go
right
about
or
it.
wrong. It was just, that's what they wanted.
Yeah, that's a really good method. I like the giving quick and dirty prototypes, telling them exactly what to do. That's the hard thing, is having them ignore the things you want them to ignore with a sample that you didn't make and not come back and be like, but that's not what our content's about. They're not talking about blood. So.
Yeah, I don't think this works. Yes, it does. Just think about it in terms of how blood flows instead of how food goes down somebody's esophagus.
Yes, exactly. So
lessons learned.
What went well first?
I think once they got the hang of it, the getting me the content and getting me the information that I needed in the time that I needed it was great. Because there was so much content, there was a lot of back and forth. We had very open communication and frequent communication. So we were always communicating. And so over communicating is, I think, one of the things that probably worked very well on both sides, to be able to over communicate.
That's good. Is there anything else that worked especially well?
I think the review cycle, once we got the hang of it, the review cycle ended up working well. But there were some challenges getting that to work well the first couple of times because they didn't have the right. So one of the things that didn't work well, they didn't always have the right subject matter expert or the subject matter expert who created the content to begin with reviewing the lesson. And so when you have somebody who's different than the person who created the content, now every single page is, well, I wouldn't say that, I would say this, and you didn't include this, and you know, so there was a lot of that happening in the first couple of lessons where I'm like, whoa, why is the feedback coming back and why is it so drastically different? And even though we just went through all of these modules, they had this one that I mentioned off the top that they had forgot about one of the lessons. And so I am just finishing that up. But that's what happened with this one too, is they had somebody create the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint was given to me. The content was complete. The content was signed off. Everything's good. But that person is away or on vacation or whatever, and they're not available to review it. So instead of that person whose role was physical therapist reviewing the content, now they've got a nurse and somebody else reviewing this content. And they're very different audiences, and the content needs to be slightly different for the different audiences. So it's an evaluation tool that they use. So I think I've spent longer on this last lesson than I did on any of them.
Yeah.
Just because.
Yeah, that's, I've been in that situation. That is the worst. That's getting students to figure out what matters that it's different and what doesn't matter that it's different. And it's just.
Or if they need to have all of the audiences together, then I just need to know we're doing all the audiences together. Right.
So that's one thing that didn't work well. How did you get through, or how did you get the review cycle to the point where it did work well?
It was just a matter of, this is the person who put the content together, and I would outline to the project coordinator and my stakeholder manager, this course is now ready for review. You can find it on, here's the link to review, Articulate Review. And I'm looking for the following feedback from this person. If this person is not available, then someone in that person's role needs to review this. And they were really good.
That's very good. So, and the feedback on was, not pictures, the content, the specific areas of the content that were ready. And did you have one big review after you were done a module, or did you have them review bits and pieces as you went along?
For the most part, they were reviewing it one time.
Okay.
Yeah, they reviewed it when it was finished. And then they would review it. Once those changes were made, they would review it in the learning management system just to make sure that everything's working the way they want it to in the learning management system and capturing completions.
Okay. So, and that was that the only thing you needed captured was completion? You didn't have to track the individual interactions? No,
just completion. And it was 80% complete. It wasn't even like, we didn't have to watch the whole thing. So. Which is
good, because it's hard to get Storyline to tell you anything is 100% complete.
Yeah. Yep.
So that was something that didn't work well. Is there anything else that didn't work especially well?
So, as we were chatting earlier in the green room, I did make a couple of notes because I did want to make sure that I talked about these things. So the first thing is getting the right subject matter expert. Because that can be really frustrating when you do have somebody who creates the content and then all of a sudden they're not available to help with this and to validate why they said this needs to be on the page when everybody else doesn't think it needs to be there, but this person who was previously instructing it in class always included it. The other thing is that as part of this was helping the subject matter experts understand that this is not in class or webinar delivery. And so one of the things that we did ask them to do was to take the very first module. It was a very generic module. It wasn't created by me. It was created by the person previous to me. and have them sit through it so that they understand what our goal was. This is what we're looking for as an end type of product. And this is how it works. And the course that they went through, it was a little bit longer, had lots of interactivity and things like that. And so they would go through that before they went through and reviewed any of the courses for me. And yeah, Kim, they did.
Wow.
It just became part of what they were doing. This is the expectation. You're gonna understand what e-learning is before you come in and review it. Because if you don't understand what we're looking for, you don't understand how it's going to work, and you don't understand what your audience is going to see, and that it's different than instructor-led. So they needed to see the difference.
That's good. And did you have access in the original content that you were given, in like the WebEx or the webinars, to the chat to see what questions people had asked as they?
No.
Okay.
No.
That's one of the hardest things to get out of ISME, I think, is what don't people understand? What do I need to add?
Where are the challenges? What do people ask you about all the time? And what's the one thing you always tell people about because XYZ?
Right. Okay. Next thing that didn't work.
Controlling feedback and feedback cycles. That was really, it's on me to ensure that the feedback that I'm getting is appropriate feedback. And that if it's not, I need to work with somebody to figure out how to get the feedback I need when I need it. And that I'm not planning on doing 15 or 20 reviews of this course because there is so much content to do that they needed to really, they needed to review the content. The subject matter expert needed to review the content. And for a couple of the lessons, I really needed the project coordinator and the stakeholder to go in and review the comments to tell me what I should and should not actually listen to as per feedback. Because some of them were just like, it was just weird. Like, oh, well, that's on the screen. You should narrate that. So, and then of course, the typical project issues of time and availability, vacations, travel, work shifts. If you can get that information up front, get it up front.
Yeah. Were you able to get it at any point organized for you, or did you figure it out eventually?
I would tell them the week before I was working on something, what I was going to be working on. So in our twice weekly meetings, they always knew what was coming up. So they'd be able to tell me if someone was going to be available, or in some cases, some of them were traveling over to the UAE and they weren't available. They weren't going to be available. So we did end up kind of shifting projects around so that we could make sure that work was always getting done. We weren't held up.
Yeah, you didn't have time to just sit around and wait. Was there anything else that?
Just reading Leslie's comment, because she's right. If I had a quarter for every time I had to explain why we don't need to narrate everything on the screen, you'd be rich.
Or why we shouldn't narrate everything that's on the screen.
And just to validate, Josh gave a link to medical pronunciation, forvo.com. And Joe Suarez, who also works in healthcare, has vouched for it. He's given it the thumbs up. So that's good news.
Oh, wait. Kara
has big news.
Wait, I mean a drum roll. There's cake.
We're all waiting.
I know. Podcast stopped. Cast stopped. We're waiting. Okay. While we wait, did you have anything else that didn't work well? Michael.
No, I think, after the project's over and you do your kind of lessons learned review with the subject matter experts, and you just kind of, there are lots of little things, but nothing that really impacted the project. So
Kara's big news is that she was invited to go to Egypt to study their education system. That is awesome. Congratulations.
That's amazing,
Kara.
my friend. Well deserved.
So cool. Oh, Kara, that's very, very cool. And You can take a trip to Turkey on your
Oh,
way or on your way back. You probably have a layover in Turkey. That is amazing.
that is super.
Yeah, you're definitely going to steal a camel. Everyone, get ready. That is very cool.
You're
Congratulations.
so funny, Kara. I love it.
Um,
But yeah, lots of little things. But, I think just being able to communicate openly and to, I think, be flexible to what the client is asking for, understanding that they're not e-learning experts. They don't know necessarily that what they're asking for isn't going to fit or might not work in a certain situation, but maybe it could work somewhere else. And if we could try to do what I did and create 2 pages, it doesn't take that much longer, really. So you have 1 page, you just whip up another page and get their feedback and help them understand that they are a valued part of the process. Like it's not a me versus them or them versus me. It's we're all here to meet the goals of what this overall program is all about. So
yeah, you're a very natural consultant. You have that, it's faster to just make a second sample than sit there and try to describe what that sample might look like and argue about details that, may or may not be true about it. So I think that's really good advice. So what are you going to change for the next time or continuation?
Well, luckily I was given 3 subject matter experts for the next project that they had. So it was a little easier because it was only 3 subject matter experts for the courses that we developed for them. So it was a lot easier.
Yes. Yeah.
But for the next time, it's just something you always have to do. You always have to be flexible and meet the needs of the subject matter expert, because without that subject matter expert, I don't really have content. I don't have an e-learning. I don't have anything, right? I could create a bunch of pictures on the screen, but without them telling me why those pictures are on the screen and how it helps them do their job or do their job better, just be nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. You can write a case study, but it might have nothing to do with anything anyone's going to do. Yep.
Yeah.
That's good. So keep that open communication with SMEs, keep that open communication with the project managers and stakeholders. I also have a note here, something that I just absolutely loved, which is you had them put the SME's name and contact information on the PowerPoint. So you could keep straight who to ask about what.
Yeah.
And then that gives them, I think, a sense of ownership over that content, which is good and bad. Because eventually you're going to have someone else saying, actually, I would have said that a different way. And then that's a little bit of a battle. But it at least is then a battle on the SME level and not on the content translator, content creator level.
That's true. That is true. Yes. But communications, Kim's got it right. The communication trail, not just the communication, but the communication trail. One thing, and I know we're running out of time, but one thing that I did is I actually kept PDFs of the feedback from Articulate Review. And because sometimes we had to republish in a new, there's just so much crap in there that we just republished to a new story, a new Articulate Review. And so keeping that old one and saying, here's your old feedback. This is the consolidated feedback from that lesson. Here it is now, just make sure that everything's good and having that trail.
Yes. Yeah. I always try to make notes directly on the comments of how it was adjudicated, what I did, what I didn't do, why I didn't do it.
Yeah.
So yeah. And the content.
And the content too. Yeah.
And then did you have the project coordinator and stakeholder explain or mark anything that they thought wasn't worth addressing or didn't matter?
Yeah. They would go in and they tried deleting comments, but it didn't really work. So they would just tell me the page reference, or they would add a comment to the page of something generic so that the subject matter expert didn't know what they were actually saying about the content.
Oh, okay.
You know, it wasn't as obvious as DEL, but or DLT. It was something, you know, where they would put a code in and I would know that I don't need to worry about their comment.
Okay. Oh, that's a good way to do it, so they don't have to feel like they have to write a full justification for everything.
Yeah.
That's really good.
And then the subject matter expert didn't actually know what we were talking about, so.
Yeah. Okay, it's noon. Do you have anything you want to plug, or you have more episodes of your podcast coming up? So
they'll be coming out sometime soon. Fingers crossed there will be one tomorrow.
Yay.
We'll see.
Yay. So thank you all for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Thank you for listening. Thanks for participating in the chat. I love you guys.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me, especially on late notice. And have a wonderful day.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.